I suspect that either the capability is not as good as they first said it was, and of course you get caught with your trousers down if you use it and it doesn't work because whoever else they're selling it to, including their own forces, is going to look at it and go, "Hang on a sec, this doesn't do what it says on the box."
And Ukraine's developed its own Flamingo missile, which has got a bigger warhead. It's got a longer range. It's a cruise missile as well. Do you think what do you see from you've used these sorts of weapons beforehand? From what you're seeing, and it's all open source, but do you think Tomahawk's going to add anything to that Flamingo can't?
No, well, I don't think so. What they've shared about the Flamingo covered, like you said, larger warhead. What they've described as the same capability. I mean, it's interesting to say they've developed their own missile with the same capability in what, a period of a couple of years. That's duly impressive, and we should be buying everything we can off Ukraine and telling them what we want. It would solve defence procurement in the UK, I suspect, doing it that way around. Um, but the interesting bit for me is not just the missile and the capability; it's how they self-generate the capability to actually operate the missiles.
Well, it's interesting. If you look at all the old Soviet designs, I've gone back and looked at this. It was Ukrainian engineers who designed them. It was Ukrainian manufacturers that made most of the old Soviet kit and a lot of the ground-based kit as well, and certainly all the nuclear missiles. So I think the Russians are slightly concerned because it was Ukrainian specialists that developed everything that the Russians are trying to use against them. Again, sticking with missiles, we've heard ever since. Um, you Chancellor Scholz came into Germany. He said he was going to supply the German Taurus missile, an air-launched cruise missile, to Ukraine on day one of him taking over as Chancellor. But then he's failed to do so. What do you know about Taurus? Is it in the same line as cruise missiles? Why do you think the Germans are not supplying it?
Well, it's an air-launched subsonic missile, heavy penetrative warhead. So and image-based navigation, so not dissimilar to Tomahawk. Um, I suspect that either the capability is not as good as they first said it was, and of course you get caught with your trousers down if you use it and it doesn't work because whoever else they're selling it to, including their own forces, is going to look at it and go, "Hang on a sec, this doesn't do what it says on the box." And that's the problem with all of these systems that you send into war zones like this. I mean, the Russians use Syria as a test bed for every missile they could possibly dispatch to test it works and do all that. And Ukraine has also been a test bed to demonstrate capability. When the Bradley tanks going in there and doing their bit shows how good that capability is. It really has felt like that they're showing capability in what is a really really tragic war where civilians are dying and people who have nothing to do with this conflict. They're not even soldiers fighting each other get involved in this. And then on the outer side, if you're not actually in it and you're in defense, there it is as a test bed. So I suspect that the Germans don't want to show how good or how bad that capability is.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. Ukraine has been used as a test bed both by the Russians, the Chinese, and on one side attacking Ukraine, and by all Western nations on the other side. We're seeing some developments in naval technology, in particular around naval drones, and the use and the combination of seaborne drones, but also then being supported by traditional air drones. Do you think we're seeing something that is going to massively change maritime tactics?
I do. And I think you can look at the Ukraine part and the Black Sea as a very micro piece of drone warfare or unpersoned warfare. But actually, if you really want to see it, go look at China doing a display with 20,000 drones all doing the same thing and everything else, and you go militarize that. I mean, you could turn and say, okay, well, as long as you take out the control drone, then everything else will go. But the reality is, technology's moved on in the drone world, and one control drone, something else will take over. And how do you take out 20,000 air drones all at the same time? What capabilities do you need to be able to do that? So I find that for the maritime is just it is super interesting and super exciting from a tactics point of view. How are you going to do that? How are you going to do it? I spend a lot of time trying to think about what the solutions for this in the underwater battle spaces because it's going to be the same problem everywhere.
Well, if you were still serving, if you were still, in a leadership position, commanding a submarine, or hopefully more by this stage of your career, what would be keeping you awake at night at the moment, from what you're seeing in developments?
The pace of change is what would keep me awake. Well, in fact, two things: pace of change, and then rules of engagement. Because the enemy we are going to fight in the future will not fight by the same rules of engagement that we do, and our rules of engagement are geared up for something historical and not for the future. And so I think policymakers, how do you get the only way you get things changed quickly is with changing policy. Changing policy takes ages. So I really feel for my contemporaries who are in very senior positions in the Navy trying to push this stuff through as quickly as they possibly can to be able to counter what the future threat has coming. Because it needs it needs political leadership and it needs political policy to be able to help the journey through.
Do you think we in the UK, and do you think the West is actually seeing this? Are you getting indications that there is a pace of change coming, and looking to the future, or are we still looking backwards and trying to fight the last war?
My feeling is some of it we are moving very fast with, but it's always the same. If you want to move fast, you go urgent operational requirement, and then you get exactly what you want. You pay an extra price, but it arrives immediately because the technology is already there. I think we are repeating the same thing we always do, which is try and develop the technological solution, and then we spend 15 years developing technology that by the time it comes into play is obsolete. And actually, what we should be doing is looking immediately to see what China, who's leading the way, is. What are they developing now? How do we counter that? And do it very, very quickly with what we've got existing technology. So all this technology readiness levels, looking down at the twos and threes, which is concepts and ideas, they need to be looking at a TRL 9, which is already available. Now, how do you pull all that stuff together in order to fight what is currently and what is coming in the future?
Yeah, the Cold War was interesting because all our technical developments were driven by what the other side had developed, and it all came through technical intelligence. That doesn't seem to happen anymore. It's all commercial industry is trying to say this is what the threat is, and this is what we can sell you to deal with it. And that's where we tend to get things wrong. The Chinese seem to be getting it right. Do you think the Russians are in a difficult position with what's happening to them now? Do you think Putin is as strong as he thinks he is?
I think internally Putin is strong. He is strong. Personally, he is. Nobody's going to take over. There's not going to be an election that gets rid of him, and then suddenly a moderate comes in. That's not going to happen. But militarily, and you need to be strong militarily when you're weak economically, because he is, and he's not as strong as he once was. So the only way that he can gain that strength is to side with China. China, China is not aggressive against the West. It's a trade. I mean, you only have to read back through tons of history in Chinese history, and you realize that they're a trading nation, but they're a strong trading nation. They don't start. The reason they've been able to do as much as they have internally is because they're not fighting wars. They're spending money on infrastructure and making sure they got the best cities and the best communications and all this stuff, and building up their forces. But they're not fighting any wars, so they're not wasting money on war effectively. Whereas Putin is hemorrhaging money, and gradually being shut down with sanctions and everything else. So I think he will try and he will lever off his relationship with China, but China will actually have to manage where they want to position with this as they gradually move into the world leadership role.
I think it's very interesting trying to analyze what Russia is mortgaging to pay for its relationship with China and everything else, and that has to be natural resources, and China will want to protect that and what's happening. So go on, look into your crystal ball, and tell us where you think the conflict in Ukraine is going to be in sort of 12 to 18 months' time.
I'm going to say it's going to be exactly where it is now. I don't think anything will change for a variety of reasons. Russia are never going to concede what they've got already, and they're always going to want more. Ukraine is never going to concede what they've lost, and rightly so. The West is never going to go head to head with Russia. China is not going to intervene with it. Iran might add drones or whatever else, but that will be about it. And so this stalemate will continue, and it will just stay where it is with, the sad fact that civilian people will lose life. Soldiers will be killed on both sides, and it will just continue as it is.
Yeah, well, sadly, I have to agree with your assessment. I don't think there's going to be much change. But on a slightly positive note, it means that we'll get more opportunities to chat and try and bring some greater understanding of what's going on. But Ryan Ramsey, it's been a real pleasure talking to you today on Times Radio Frontline.
Good to speak to you. Thanks.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.